Hi, I'm the History Guy. I love history, and if you love history too, this is the channel for you. The decade following the end of the First World War represented a period of significant change in the Western world. An era of sustained prosperity. It represented not just a social and artistic dynamism, but a huge development of new technologies. Women got the vote, houses got electricity, automobiles replaced horses, and jazz music blossomed. Social critics lamented the new materialism of the age, and one company managed to combine two of the new technologies of the era and become a world leader in both. You might never have heard of the Alexander Corporation, but at one time they were at the top of two of the industries that defined the Roaring Twenties, and that is history that deserves to be remembered. Airplanes had come of age in the Great War, able to carry more weight, greater distances more reliably. But the war had not just helped to develop the technology, it had made lots of planes. Prior to the war, few people had even seen a plane. After, people could actually buy them. In 1920, the English Air Force auctioned off 10,000 planes and 30,000 aircraft engines. In the United States, the Army sold off thousands of the Curtiss JN-4, the legendary Jenny. Surplus aircraft were sometimes sold in their original packing crates for as little as $50. And the war had produced the pilots who could fly them. These pilots popularized the new machines with feats of daring in the era of the barnstormer. Pilots competed in races and contests, charged $1 per minute for rides, and tried to outdo each other performing stunts. Many famous pilots earned their wings in the era, notably Charles Lindbergh, who barnstormed under the name Daredevil Lindbergh. Pioneering daredevil Bessie Coleman became the first woman of African American descent to hold a pilot's license. Unable to find anyone willing to train her in the U.S., she traveled to France to get her training and earned an international pilot license in 1921. Barnstorming under the name Queen Bess, she became a role model for millions. And the beginning of regular air routes with airmail delivery also offered opportunities. By 1925, U.S. Post Office airplanes were delivering 14 million letters and packages a year and were maintaining regular flight schedules. Airmail appealed particularly to bankers and other businessmen who regularly began to use it to move checks and financial documents more quickly, reducing the float on checks and the length of time that funds were idle and unavailable for use. In 1925, the U.S. government started contracting airmail routes, helping to spur a profitable civil aeronautics industry. In the same era, cinema would take over entertainment in the Western world. At the beginning of the 1920s, cinema was brief, colorless, and quiet. But that would all soon change. Techniques for adding color to film were patented as early as 1899, but the process made a massive change with the advent of Technicolor. Technicolor not only produced a greater color vibrancy than earlier colorization methods like Cinemacolor, it also did not require special projectors. In 1922, the film The Toll of the Sea became the first general release film in Technicolor. Technicolor sequences were then featured in some of the biggest blockbusters of the 1920s. In 1919, genius inventor Lee De Forest, whose invention of the Audion tube allowed the electronics revolution, patented a process called phonofilm, which recorded synchronized sound directly onto film. In a confluence of new technologies, one of De Forest's first test films for the system was of a flying Curtiss Jenny. In 1926, Don Juan was the first film released with sound effects and music, and 1927's The Jazz Singer became the first talkie. By the mid-1920s, 50 million Americans a week, the equivalent of half the population, went to the movies. By the end of the 1920s, 83 cents out of every American dollar spent on entertainment went to the movie industry. But as cinema and aircraft rose to new heights, one company managed to rise to leadership in both industries. J. Don and Don M. Alexander were born in Keokuk, Iowa, and got their career started early as children in outdoor advertising. They used a French stereoscopic projector to project colorful slides and advertisements for local businesses on bed sheets that were fashioned as movie screens. They turned that into a real business in 1919 when they purchased a movie studio in Spokane, Washington, and started to produce film advertising. In film advertising, you would film a commercial for a local business, and then you go pay a movie theater to show that commercial before or in between features. Don M. was technically minded, so he would handle the production, but J. Don was a salesman, and he would lead the sales force. It was a new industry. It took some time to develop. According to the company website, they made $2.50 in their first year. But the idea eventually caught on, and they became very successful. By 1923, they had outgrown the Spokane facility, and they purchased a new, much larger facility covering more than 2 city blocks in Englewood, Colorado, near Denver. This new facility allowed them to sell a whole lot more advertising, and J. Don had developed a very successful strategy for recruiting salespeople by using a liberal commission policy and a good training program to help them be successful. But he had bigger plans. J. Don thought that his salespeople spent too much time in travel, and what he wanted to do was to send his sales force across the nation in airplanes. In 1923, that idea was downright revolutionary. He sent one of his salesmen to Missouri, then a center for airplane manufacturing, to acquire a plane and learn how to fly. He purchased a 1920 Laird Swallow, a rugged biplane that had room for an instructor and a student in tandem open cockpits, for $2,300. The salesman took 10 hours of instruction and then flew for Colorado. By the time he got there, he was a veteran, and he taught many of the other members of the sales force to fly. Sold on the idea of an airborne sales force, which would not only spend less time traveling, but also be able to deliver films faster and attract attention as a bonus, J. Don decided to purchase 50 airplanes. But at the time, airplane manufacturers were hardly producing a plane a month, and no one took his request for 50 seriously. So J. Don asked his company engineers to develop their own design for a small, lightweight airplane that could be operated with a minimum of expense. First flown in September 1925, that design was called the Eagle Rock. It was a simple, rugged biplane that was easy and inexpensive to operate. It was 25 feet 11 inches long, had a wingspan of 36 feet 8 inches, and could accommodate a pilot and passenger, and could be fitted with a number of different available airplane engines. Foreseeing a market for the plane for small businesses and individual owners, the brothers incorporated the Alexander Aircraft Company, and then formed Alexander Industries, which held both the film company and the aircraft manufacturer. The plan was to build the airplanes on the Alexander facility there in Englewood, Colorado, but a fire there and a lack of ability to expand compelled them to move their operations south of Denver to Colorado Springs. The Eagle Rock became one of the most popular planes of its era and was used for airmail and crop dusting. But because it was able to fit a number of different engines, it was especially popular for barnstorming and air racing. In a time when airplane manufacturers regularly collapsed after making just a few planes, the Alexander factory in Colorado Springs was able to manufacture 8 airplanes a day, and the company had 33 distributors and 143 dealers throughout the nation. Nearly 900 Alexander Eagle Rocks were eventually produced. For a brief period between 1928 and 1929, Alexander Aircraft was the largest manufacturer of aircraft in the world. The most spectacular event in aviation history of the era was Charles Lindbergh's 1927 solo transatlantic flight from New York to Paris. Reportedly, the Eagle Rock had been one of the planes considered for his flight, but the factory production orders were already full. Eventually, he chose his famous Ryan monoplane for his legendary flight. For a brief period of time, one of the world's largest airplane manufacturers and one of the world's largest film studios were part of the same company. J. Don and Don M. Alexander had ridden to the top of the Roaring Twenties. But everything changed for them and for the world with the stock market crash of 1929. With the Great Depression came the collapse of the market for small aircraft. As orders dried up, the Alexander Aircraft Company filed for bankruptcy in 1932. The film advertising company remained successful into the 1950s. By the early 1950s, the Alexander Film Company was producing between 2,000 and 3,000 films annually and maintained a library of films covering 8,200 different subjects. But the advent of television and decline of local theaters put an end to the market for film advertising. They found some success in television advertising, but steadily declined. The company stopped producing films in 1967. J. Don Alexander passed away in 1955 at the age of 70, and Don M. Alexander passed away in 1972 at the age of 79. Their leadership in both the film and airplane industries perfectly represents, encapsulates the unique dynamism and optimism of that era we called the Roaring Twenties. It is history that deserves to be remembered. I'm the History Guy, and I hope you enjoyed this edition of my series of short snippets of forgotten history about 10 minutes long. And if you did enjoy it, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button, which is there on your left. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. And if you'd like more snippets of forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.